The internet is not a library. We like to think of it as a vast, organized collection of human knowledge, but those of us who were there in the early days, the days of dial-up tones and lawless message boards, know the truth. The internet is a dark, rising ocean. Most people only ever swim in the shallows of the surface web. But beneath the search engines and the social media platforms, there are trenches. Deep, pressurized zones where data goes to die, and where things that were never meant to be found wait for an invitation. In 2004, a file began to circulate on a forgotten IRC channel. It was called Terminal 9. It was only 6 megabytes, but it contained enough horror to break a dozen lives. My name is Marcus, and tonight we are entering the deep end. I was 19 years old, living in a cramped studio apartment in Seattle. It was the height of the lost media craze. Everyone was looking for the next cursed video or the next redacted government document. When I saw the link for Terminal 9, I didn't hesitate. I thought I was untouchable. I thought a screen was a shield. The forum post was simple. Do not watch alone. Do not watch with the lights off. Do not look behind you. I laughed. I turned off the lights, cracked a soda, and hit download. The file didn't have an extension. No .mp4, no .avi. It was just an executable. A bridge. The installation took forever. My computer, a beige tower that groaned every time I opened a browser, sounded like it was grinding gravel. The screen flickered, the resolution dropping until the icons on my desktop were nothing but jagged blocks of color. And then the player opened. It was a simple black window with no controls, no play button, no volume slider, just a grainy, green-tinted night vision feed. At first I thought it was a prank, a loop of someone's basement. But then I saw the chair. I saw the pile of laundry in the corner. I saw the glowing power light of a beige computer tower. My heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it stopped entirely. The video wasn't a recording. It was a live feed of my own room from a camera that didn't exist. I didn't own a webcam. In 2004, they were clunky, expensive peripherals that sat on top of monitors. I looked around my dark studio, my eyes searching the corners for a hidden lens. There was nothing. But on the screen, I could see myself. I could see the back of my head, the glow of the monitor illuminating my hair. I waved my hand. The figure on the screen waved back, a half-second delay making the movement look jerky and unnatural. That's when the wrongness started to bleed through the digital noise. On the screen, the door to my closet was open. In reality, I could see the door out of the corner of my eye. It was shut. I stared at the monitor, my breath coming in shallow hitches. On the screen, a hand, long, pale, and trembling, slowly emerged from the closet door. It reached out, its fingers brushing against my jacket. The anatomy of the thing was entirely wrong. The arm didn't bend at a joint. It curved like a piece of heavy, wet rope. As the shoulder followed, I saw that it was completely hairless, wrapped in a sheen of something that looked like digital static translated into physical slime. It didn't step out of the closet so much as it poured itself onto the floor, its limbs folding and unfolding in a silent, agonizing rhythm. The smell hit me a moment later. Ozone, burning plastic, and the sickeningly sweet scent of old, stagnant water. It was the smell of a machine trying to replicate biology and failing. I spun around. The closet door was still shut. The room was silent save for the hum of my computer's cooling fan. I turned back to the screen. The hand was gone. Instead, the figure on the monitor, the version of me, was no longer looking at the screen. He was looking at the closet. He looked terrified. I tried to close the program. I smashed the escape key, Alt F4, even the power button on the monitor. Nothing worked. The screen was locked. A text box appeared at the bottom of the video feed, the letters appearing one by one as if they were being typed by someone on the other end. "He likes your skin," the message said. "He wants to see if it fits." The vibration started then, a low-frequency thrum that seemed to come from inside the monitor itself. The night vision feed on the screen began to glitch, the colors inverting and tearing. Every time the screen flickered, the figure in the closet was closer. One frame. It was at the edge of the door. The next, it was standing directly behind my chair. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that looked like they had been broken and reset at wrong angles. It didn't have a face. Just a smooth, featureless surface of gray skin that reflected the light of the monitor like wet slate. I felt a sudden freezing draft on the back of my neck. Not a draft from a window, a breath. I didn't look back. I knew that if I turned around, the two worlds, the digital and the physical, would merge. I grabbed the power cord for the computer and ripped it from the wall. The room plunged into total darkness. The silence was deafening. I sat there for what felt like hours, my eyes straining to see into the blackness of my own apartment. I could hear it. A soft, wet sliding sound like a heavy tarp being dragged across the floor. It moved from the closet, past my chair and toward the front door. And then the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. I wasn't locked in with it. It had locked me in, so it could leave. I sat on the floor with my knees pulled to my chest, gripping a heavy metal flashlight that I was too terrified to turn on. The hours until dawn were an eternity of auditory hallucinations. Every settling floorboard sounded like a footstep. Every rush of wind against the window pane sounded like a breath against the glass. I realized the true horror wasn't just that the thing had escaped my computer. It was that the room now felt empty, in a way it never had before. A piece of my reality had been hollowed out, replaced by a cold, humming void. When the first gray light of morning finally crept through the blinds, I didn't feel relief. I just felt exposed. Later that morning, I found my computer tower in the middle of the kitchen. It was smashed to pieces, the motherboard snapped in half, but the monitor was missing. I moved out that day. I left my furniture, my clothes, everything. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and stopped using the internet for 3 years. But sometimes when I'm in a public place, a library or a cafe, I catch a glimpse of a screen. And for a split second, I see a night vision feed of a dark room. And in the corner of that room, I see a beige monitor glowing with a familiar green light. He's still watching, and he's still wearing my skin. Was it a government experiment? A digital haunting? Or just a glitch in the fabric of reality? You decide, but remember, your screen is not a shield. It's a window. And windows work both ways. The Appalachian Mountains are old. Not just old in terms of human history, but ancient in a way the soul recognizes before the mind does. They are the oldest mountains on Earth, and they have spent millions of years watching things come and go. When you spend enough time in the deep hollows, you realize that the silence isn't empty. It's heavy. It's a physical weight that presses against your eardrums, a warning that you are a guest in a place that has forgotten the sun. My name is Elias, and for 12 years I was a park ranger in the Blackwood district. I used to laugh at the tourists who asked about the knot deer or the whistles in the dark. I don't laugh anymore. I don't even go outside after the sun hits the ridge. There are rules here. Every local knows them. If you see something in the trees that doesn't look right, look away. If you feel like you're being watched, don't run. Just walk steady. And the most important rule? If you hear a voice calling your name from the brush, even if it sounds like your mother, your brother, or your best friend, no, you didn't. You keep your eyes on the trail and you keep moving. Because in Appalachia, the woods don't have a voice of their own. They have to steal one, and once they have yours, they never let go. It happened on a Tuesday in late October. The air was crisp, smelling of wet cedar and the metallic tang of an approaching cold front. I was finishing a perimeter check near the old coal mines, a place the locals call the Throat. The Throat wasn't just a geographical landmark, it was a wound in the earth that never quite healed. The air there always felt recycled, like it had been sitting in the lungs of the mountain for centuries before being exhaled. I remember stopping to adjust my pack, and for a moment the fog thinned, just enough to see the entrance of the mine. It didn't look like a standard excavation, it looked like a mouth held open by rusted timber teeth. My grandfather used to say the miners didn't quit because the coal ran out. They quit because the echoes started talking back. I had laughed at the time, dismissing it as the superstition of men who spent too much time in the dark. But standing there with the silence ringing in my ears, I felt a vibration in the soles of my boots. It wasn't seismic. It was rhythmic, like a slow, wet heartbeat coming from deep within the shaft. I checked my equipment, thinking there was some gas leak causing my sudden dizziness, but the air was clean. The only thing alive in that clearing was the fear rising up the back of my neck. The fog had rolled in early, thick and white, swallowing the hemlocks until the world felt no bigger than the 10 feet illuminated by my flashlight. I was about halfway back to my truck when I heard it. A whistle. 2 notes, sharp and clear. It sounded exactly like the signal my brother and I used to use when we were kids. But my brother hasn't been in these woods in 20 years. He lives in Chicago. I froze. My lizard brain was screaming at me to run, but my training told me to stay calm. "Who's there?" I called out. My voice sounded small, fragile against the damp moss and the towering stone. The woods didn't answer with words. Instead, the whistle came again. Closer this time. It wasn't coming from the trail ahead, it was coming from the trees to my left. I swung my light, the beam cutting through the fog like a blade. I didn't see a person. I saw a deer. At least I thought it was a deer. It was standing behind a massive white pine, its head peeking out from behind the trunk. But the proportions were wrong. The neck was too long, stretching upward like a snake. And the eyes, they weren't on the sides of the head like a prey animal. They were in the front, forward-facing, predatory. And they were human. It wasn't just the eyes that defied nature, it was the way the skin was draped over its frame. It looked like wet parchment stretched too thin over a collection of mismatched bones. There were no joints where there should have been. Its limbs moved with a fluid, terrifying grace that suggested its skeleton was made of something more flexible, more sinister than calcium. And then there was the smell. It didn't smell like a wild animal. It smelled like a funeral parlor that had lost power in the height of summer, cloying, sweet, and metallic. It was the scent of something that lived on the edge of life, sustained entirely by the things it stole from others. I realized in that moment that I wasn't looking at a creature of flesh and blood. I was looking at a puppet made of forest debris and stolen memories, held together by a will that was older than the trees themselves. I backed away one slow step at a time. I didn't look at its eyes. I looked at the ground, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That's when the deer spoke. It didn't sound like an animal, it sounded like me. "Who's there?" it whispered. It was a perfect recording of my own voice down to the slight tremor of fear I'd had just seconds ago. I didn't wait. I turned and I ran. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I didn't care about my ankles or the rocks. I just needed to get to the truck. Behind me, I could hear it. It wasn't the sound of hooves. It was the sound of something heavy running on two legs, snapping branches like they were toothpicks. I reached the truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them into the mud. As I bent down to grab them, the whistling started again. Not just one voice. Dozens. The woods were suddenly filled with the sound of my brother, my father, and myself, all whistling that same two-note melody in a discordant, overlapping chorus. I scrambled into the cab and slammed the door, locking it just as a pale, elongated hand slapped against the driver's side window. It had 5 fingers, but they were too long, ending in black, jagged nails that looked like flint. I didn't look up. I floored it, the tires screaming as I tore down the dirt road. Dinasya. I quit the next morning. I didn't even go back for my gear. When I told the head ranger why, he didn't look surprised. He just handed me a glass of water and told me I was lucky. "It almost had your cadence," he said. "Another minute and you would have walked right to it." I live in the city now. I like the noise, I like the sirens and the traffic. But sometimes when the wind blows through the vents of my apartment just right, I hear it. 2 notes. Sharp and clear. And I know that out there in the dark heart of the mountains, something is still wearing my voice. Was it a ghost, a cryptid, or something older than the mountains themselves? You decide. But if you're ever in Appalachia and you hear a familiar voice calling from the trees, keep walking. The government doesn't erase data because it's useless. They erase it because it's heavy. 3 weeks ago, a liquidator lot from an abandoned emergency dispatch center in Aroostook County, Maine, arrived at my studio. Among the rusted routing switches and dead cathode monitors was an external server blade, wrapped in anti-static plastic and sealed with federal evidence tape dated August 14, 1994. The drive was heavily encrypted, buried under 3 layers of obsolete military partitions. But data is patient. When the final sector finally unpaddled, it didn't reveal a database. It revealed an active audio bridge, a 911 emergency call that had been placed 32 years ago. Was never disconnected. The line is still open. And whatever was on the other end of that call is still breathing into the microphone. The operator on duty that night was a woman named Clara Vance. According to public records, Clara retired the morning after this call was logged, citing sudden neurological decline. She spent the rest of her life in an institution, refusing to speak a single word until her death in 2011. Her medical files note that while she stopped using human language, she would rhythmically click her tongue against the roof of her mouth whenever the lights were turned out. 2 clicks up, 1 click down. If you've listened to our previous archive files, that pattern should make your stomach turn. Let's listen to the tape. The call comes in at 3:14 a.m. The audio quality is terrible, choked by the high-voltage hiss of a passing summer thunderstorm. The caller is a 19-year-old college student named Julian, who was working the night shift at a remote fire tower overlooking the unorganized territory near the Canadian border. Julian's voice is low, frantic, tightly controlled. He reports a fire, but not a wildfire. He claims a single tree, a massive dead white pine, 300 yards from his tower, is burning from the inside out. He says the smoke isn't gray or black. It's a deep incandescent violet, and it's falling downward, pouring across the forest floor like a heavy fluid. In the recording, you can hear Clara trying to maintain protocol. She tells him to stay inside the cabin to wait for a ground crew. But Julian isn't listening to her. His attention is fixed on the glass windows of the tower. He tells her the smoke has reached the base of his structure. It's bubbling up through the floorboards. He describes the smell not of burning wood, but of hot lead, ozone, and wet, stagnant water. The exact olfactory signature found in the Sector 7 radio reports and the Terminal 9 servers. The architecture of these anomalies is identical. It's a machine trying to translate itself into our world. Then the audio line shifts. The static thins, replaced by a pure, high-pitched sine wave that pins the master meters into the red. On the tape, Julian stops talking. For 2 full minutes, the only sound is the rhythmic thumping of his boots as he walks to the window. Clara is screaming his name through the console, her voice cracking with professional panic. Then Julian speaks again, but his voice has changed. The pitch is perfect, the cadence entirely flat, completely devoid of the terror he had seconds ago. He says, "Clara, the light makes it easier for you to see me, but I don't need the light to see you." Clara didn't know who Julian was. She had never met him. But the entity using Julian's throat knew her home address. It began to read her personal history. Her social security number, the name of her childhood dog, the exact time she woke up from a nightmare when she was 7 years old. It was a live database query of her mind, broadcasted over a public emergency frequency. On the recording, you can hear Clara desperately hitting the disconnect switches, her fingers smashing the mechanical keys. But the line was locked. The system had bypassed her hardware. The call ends not with a hang-up, but with a sound that forensic audio experts still cannot identify. It sounds like a heavy tarp being dragged across a wet concrete floor, followed by the metallic click of a deadbolt sliding into place inside the dispatch room itself. Julian was 30 miles away in the wilderness, but the sound of the door locking came from 6 inches behind Clara's chair. When the morning shift arrived at 6 a.m., the dispatch room was locked from the inside. They had to use a crowbar to break the oak door down. Clara was sitting at her station, her headset melted to the side of her face. Julian's fire tower was found completely empty. The dead white pine was gone, leaving only a perfectly circular 60-foot hole in the bedrock that appeared vitrified, turned to smooth, reflective black glass. The server drive I bought didn't stop recording in 1994. It has been running in the dark for 3 decades. And tucked into the hidden directories of the drive are audio files from last night. Files containing the sound of a ceiling fan spinning, the sound of a blanket shifting, the sound of your breathing, recorded on a 5-second delay through the microphone of the device you are using to watch this video right now. Is it a digital weapon, a terrestrial haunting? Or has the vault finally reached into your room? You decide. But tonight, before you turn off the lights, look at your screens, because windows work both ways. Sleep well. This has been Somnia Vault. Subscribe for more stories and click the linked video below for better sleep. Good night.